While we're waiting, would anyone like to volunteer to be a Jabber scribe? And or would anyone like to volunteer to help Robin with the note-taking today? Robin will be presenting for 15 minutes, but beyond that, whoever would like to dive in, they'll be very welcome. I see Watson's volunteered. Thank you, Watson, for Jabber scribe. But yeah, if we could get somebody to assist with the note-taking, that would be very welcome too. Any takers? We'll need a note taker to make sure that we don't miss the notes from the Qlog bit. I might have to start asking people by name if we don't have any takers. Jonathan, thank you very much. You were the person I had in mind to ask, so I'm glad you did it first. Right then, let's get started with the session. Hello, everybody. This is the quick working group session. If this is not the session you intended to join, please leave now. I'm Lucas. I'm one of the co-chairs. Matt, who's just putting his video on, is my fellow co-chair. This is the first session, I believe, that Lars hasn't chaired a quick session. So it's breaking new ground. I'm just trying to see, is Lars even in the attendees list? Maybe. Yes, he is. Hello, Lars. I thought you might have escaped permanently, but it seems you did want to come back. So this is the quick working group session. Like I've said, we wanted to go through the usual notewell and etc., which I'll come on to next, but also give a little bit of an update from the chairs about what has the working group been up to since the last meeting, and maybe the direction of the group. So just to, we've delivered RFC 9000 and people are a bit fragmented across different drafts. We've lost a little bit of focus, but the working group is still active. So we just wanted to keep people up to date. So the first order of business here is the notewell. We're halfway through the week now. You should be familiar with this, but if you're not, please go online and look this up and follow the links and read things. This covers the IETF policies that cover topics such as patents or code of conduct and how you participate in the IETF. So this is important for understanding your contributions to this working group and the IETF in general. So please do go and attend that. We've also want to give some special attention to the IETF code of conduct this time around. So the RFC 7154 lays out some of the expectations for participants in the IETF. We are a diverse set of people from different parts of the world, different experiences and different viewpoints, and that's good. We should celebrate that, but that we should have impersonal discussions and try to be respectful of each other. I'd like to say that the Quick Working Group has got a good track record of being able to function and have constructive discussions on things. So it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves that we should keep that up. And I look forward to a healthy discussion during this session. In terms of administrivia for this meeting, we've got the note takers. Thank you, Robin and Jonathan. The blue sheets are automatically taken care of now via Meet Echo, so that saves a chore. The chat will be via Meet Echo or Jabber, all integrated, again, no problem. For AV, if you would like to present and or participate in the queue to ask questions or clarify questions or make comments, we're using Meet Echo. People should be familiar with that by this point in the week, but if you're not, there's several icons in the top left-hand corner of the screen. You have the raise hand to get in the queue when it's open. We will be closing the queue at certain points, depending on how we manage time. We can also unmute your microphone or your video. And for presenters, we're going to go with the screen share tool built into Meet Echo today. So when it's a slot, you can click the page icon to request to share slides, and it'll be done by Meet Echo, which is a little bit more friendly to people's streaming bandwidth. Or if you really need to use share screen, or we can have the chairs share the slides for you. And the chairs will be running the queue. So my glamorous assistant, Matt, will be helping me on that front. But down to the order of business today, just a recap of the agenda. Like I said, we've got some chair updates after this administrative section. We have some working group items on the agenda. So we've got the ACK frequency draft, then we have QLog, then version negotiation, followed by quick LB. And then we're on to like a new work section. So we're going to focus here on multipath extension. Miriam will be presenting on behalf of a few folks that have been working on that and had a side meeting a couple of weeks ago. And that'll be the bulk of our time in that section. And then as the time permits, we'll look at some of the things here, like receive timestamps, quick vNext, whatever that might be, or the zero RTT BDP. So before we get started on the agenda in earnest, is there any bashing that anyone would like to do? I don't see anyone in the queue or any comments. So, okay, we'll just proceed. So I'll take some of the spotlight for the chairs here. Some updates since the last meeting in terms of the work that this group has adopted and is trying to complete. HB3 and QPAC, in case anyone's wondering, they're still in the RFC editor queue. We're awaiting the work to happen in the HTTP core drafts, which effectively a dependency for those two in a way. And they're making progress. They're doing okay. There's a whole cluster. If you're interested, you can go and look at. But we're effectively waiting. They've been there a long time. If you go and look, they were submitted around February, I believe. So we're getting there slowly. In case people aren't too familiar with the deployment strategy, if you recall a few months ago, as a group, we decided that people, now that RFC 9000 was out, which is a quick version 1, that the HTTP3 ALPN, which is the labeled H3, was allowed to be deployed on the internet. And I believe we've seen some decent amount of live deployments and interoperability on the public internet, which is great. So I don't see those specs being in the RFC editor queue as preventing progress here. If anyone was watching the mailing list, some of my issues have been identified in the drafts while those things have been in the queue. They're kind of minor things, maybe edge cases, but some of the resolutions were to normative text. So a consensus call is still live, I believe. I need to check my dates. Just on those for the working group at the request of our AD to make sure that the proposals there that we're all happy with incorporating as part of the Auth 48 changes that the editors will do. So we've seen a lot of good feedback on that. If you haven't seen them, please do check them out and let us know. Otherwise, if we don't hear pushback, we'll direct people to incorporate the changes as and when needed. The ops drafts, the applicability and manageability are in AD review. So thank you for everyone for the feedback during the various rounds of working group last call and the editors for working with people on that to get it done. That's appreciated. The datagram draft also passed working group last call, and that's also an AD review. And the grease bit working group last call is completed. We had some feedback. There's a few minor changes there, so we're just waiting a new draft. And then we'll do our Shepherd write-up and pass that on to the AD. So thank you. And Martin's just posted in the chat, he'll have an update inbound. Brilliant. Some related work. Sometimes it's easy to assume that the work that relates to Crickle happens here, and that's not true. Now that we are on RFC, people are excited and they want to use this document all, to be honest, they've been excited for a long time. So one of the things that did come to our attention around and about in the IETF was the DNS over quick specification. Went to working group last call for deprive, and I think a few of us from this working group posted some comments that have been incorporated, or proposals for addressing those comments have been incorporated. So that's good. At the IETF, we have the mask working group who met on Monday and the WebTrans working group who met on Tuesday. Those things are related. There was a side meeting for Media Over Quick, which is a non-working group that was formed. I see in the chat that I have the dates wrong, so I apologize for that. We had a meeting yesterday. Jonathan just jumped in the queue and then left, so I think he was trying to draw my attention to that. I hope I've addressed the points. All of the side meetings in the IETF side meetings calendar, so please check that for the actual correct date and time and actual joining instructions. So there'll be a link to it was Zoom yesterday. So that isn't necessarily strictly anything on Quick. We're still trying to figure out things in that group that may be, what are the requirements for using Quick versus modifying Quick, and trying to understand if any work needs to come back here or not. So anyone interested in that, there's some healthy discussion there. It's kind of interesting. And Robin also mentioned there's a side meeting today about OpenSSL and its Quick support for doing stuff. So if anyone's interested in that, again, check out the side meeting calendar, because all the details will be there. And then talk about new work. Just to remind people, this shouldn't be new information, but when it comes to adopting new work items, we have a charter that's up on the data tracker. And just to kind of summarize that, the working group is the focal point for any Quick related work in the IETF. The focus areas are kind of three of them: maintenance and evolution of the Quick specs, as and when we need to do things that improve upon or fix or iterate upon drafts that have been adopted items and been published. So that should be fairly obvious. Other things about supporting the deployability, which relate to drafts like ops drafts or qlog or load balancers, those level of things. So we can support non-protocol specific work items too, if they make sense for us to do things. And then new extensions to Quick. So Datagram's an example of an extension, and we've got another one coming up later in this session. But as I mentioned, DNS over Quick is an example of how an application protocol could use Quick, and that work was done outside our working group. It could be done here if we really need it, if a suitable home couldn't be found, but I would hope that most of the discussion in such specifications relates to the application protocol, and that we have an awareness of the work that's happening there, so we can, people from this working group can go and review with their Quick head on and maybe give some feedback about those aspects of things. And then defining new congestion controls is out of scope. So please don't come with those things, because we'll have to point you somewhere else. But specifically to this session, we're going to talk about multipath Quick extension. Some of the background here, without trying to preempt too much of what Miriam will talk about later, is that we had an interim focused on multipath like a year ago, which, multipath was in scope for the initial charter that this working group had, and we de-scoped it into the current form that we have today. And there was a lot of ideas around what multipath could be, what different problems they were trying to solve. And so we had that meeting last year, which I think helped, but didn't get us into the right position, and we still had a lot of work on. As the year's gone on, we've cleared things from our agenda, and we have some more time, but we also have a clear idea of the problems, and people have come together for a more unified proposal. So we'll see how the working group think on that, and we'll be taking, the chairs will be taking an assessment about whether we think that work is worth adopting in its current form. So I want to ask people to keep that in mind through the presentation, because that's a question we'll be asking at the end of it. So that's the end of the quick shares session. Next up on the agenda is ACK frequency. So I penciled in Jana to present here, but I guess maybe it might be Ian too. Which one of you is it? Let me pull up this. No. Let me stop sharing my slides.
Lucas, it's going to be Ian. If Ian isn't in the room and isn't able to do it, I'll do it. But I think Ian was supposed to be doing it.
I see Ian. Ian, are you willing and able to present? No response.
All right.
Ian?
Ian's.
Okay. Should we skip to another session and maybe come back to that one?
Let's do that. I'll chat with you in the back. But if he's not able to do it, obviously I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
It'll just be a little bit noisy for me. Oh, there he is.
Oh, no. Here he is.
I'm sorry about that. I had my battery was launched. Apologies. Let me get my headphones on.
Would you like us to drive the slides, Ian, or are you fine to do that yourself?
Yeah, I can grab them. Yeah. Let me just. Oh. I don't know if you're experiencing echo, but usually you do. Cool. I just asked to share. So okay, great. There we go. Cool. Yeah, we're kind of hoping to wrap up the ACK frequency draft in the relatively near future. There's one fairly substantial design issue that's outstanding that I'm going to highlight in these slides. But first, I'm going to start with kind of an overview of where the frame is at, and and talk through that. And if there are any questions, obviously, feel free to interject. So here's the current frame format. Obviously, there's a type, there's a sequence number. So if you receive them out of order, because it is allowed still to retransmit any frame you would like verbatim, it is possible that a sender that does this could receive a ACK frequency that arrives out of order. So that fixes that problem. The ACK eliciting threshold, of course, is the number of packets that, technically it's not the number, the maximum number of ACK eliciting packets that the recipient of this frame can receive prior or before sending an acknowledgement. So the key point is that that makes 0 a valid value and such. So just make sure that you kind of get the wording on that correctly. And it's also the wording's been tweaked around a little bit relatively recently. Request max stack delay. So that's the value you'd like the peer to delay an immediate acknowledgement for, delay an acknowledgement for upon receiving an ACK eliciting packet. Immediate acknowledgements are totally different. Yes, Isla, sorry, I need to do something later. Thanks, dear. Sorry. The ignore C field is ignoring congestion experience. This was added both as a result of conversations about how one might use ECN in different, or ECN marking in different contexts besides the two that are currently kind of TCP style and classic ECN. And then the ignore order is basically the same concept. In both cases, you're kind of ignoring a signal that may or may not be indicative of congestion for a longer period of time in order so you can aggregate it for multiple packets of acknowledgement. So we did add some caveats there about like the safety of these and how you should really be using these, and those are in the draft now. So next slide. So the design issue that came up recently was the latency to detect packet loss. So Kazuo pointed this out, and this is somewhat related to a previous issue I filed, but I think Kazua's both phrasing and problem statement were much better than mine was. And so the issue is that one ACK is sent immediately today, just like with V1. But after that, the next ACK will not be sent until the ACK eliciting threshold of the ACK delay are hit. And there's a lot of situations where that might slow down the packet threshold loss detection. So the canonical example is you have a drop, you send an immediate ACK, and then you don't send another ACK for, say, 10 or 20 packets. It's pretty easy to hit a situation where, if you send another ACK, 2 packets later, you could have immediately declared a loss and moved on, but instead you're waiting, say, like a quarter RTT or an eighth of an RTT for the time threshold to hit. In data centers, this kind of could be worse, unfortunately, because data centers tend to have alarm granularities, which are not amazing, and commonly the thresholds we're talking about, a quarter RTT and eighth RTT, are literally unachievable in like a microsecond scale data center networking environment. So this probably is actually a worse problem in a data center than the public internet. But anyway, that's kind of the outline of the problem. And the most important conclusion is that loss detection latency has the potential to be worse than in Quick V1. So the proposal here is to communicate the reordering threshold to the receiver instead of this ignore order that we have right now. And the algorithm comes down to that the receiver needs to send an immediate acknowledgement whenever there are missing packets somewhere between the largest acknowledged value that has been sent in a previous acknowledgement, minus the reordering threshold, and the largest acknowledged that currently has been received at this moment from a more recently received packet, minus the reordering threshold. So that guarantees that if there basically any packet in that range that is missing, assuming that the peer has correctly communicated their reordering threshold to you, that means that they can immediately declare it lost the moment they receive your immediate acknowledgement. So the result is that it reduces the number of ACKs when packets are received out of order when compared to Quick V1, while also improving the loss detection latency versus Quick V1, because there's a number of cases now. Before in Quick V1, because you ACKed every other packet, it was possible they had a circumstance where you didn't receive that final packet threshold ACK, say because it was 2 packets later and not 3, or you kind of been off by 1 error, and it would increase loss detection latency very slowly versus this approach. So ideally, this gives you the best of both worlds. The major negative is it definitely increases implementation cost by a slight margin because you have to implement this algorithm right here. So that's the item to discuss. Do people have thoughts? This PR has been kind of out there for a while, and as is the issue. Yeah, Christian, please go. Oh, I can't hear you, Christian. I still cannot hear you. Should we skip?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, that's a weirdness with the microphone. Too many buttons. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you're proposing to add a reordering threshold based on packet counts, and I am not sure that's the right tool. The reason I say that is that we have tried a lot of that. Reordering happens a lot in some kind of multiplexing scenarios, especially if the network is doing equal cost multiplexing, equal cost load balancing. And in that case, it seems much more efficient to use delays than using packet counts. So
Yeah,
there is that.
I would agree. There are circumstances where this is not actually a helpful mechanism. And so we did maintain the existing kind of ignore order functionality. If you send a reordering threshold of 0, it basically means the existing ignore order functionality. Yeah, I think it really depends on the circumstance. So this, I guess, is really about giving the sender, which as described in the recovery draft, the loss detection congestion control draft, there are two essential mechanisms for declaring loss there, right? One is reordering threshold in packet counts, and one is in time. And so this is giving the sender the maximum number of tools to express sort of those two mechanisms between the actual and the reordering threshold. But you're right that this may not always be applicable.
Well, no, I think that you're thinking of the ACK delay, but the ACK delay has two functions there. One of the ACK delay function is the pacing of ACKs. As I said, I don't want to receive ACKs more than 10 milliseconds apart if everything is working fine. What you're looking at here is a secondary mechanism to say, please fire quickly if something seems wrong. Now, something seems wrong for you can be expressed either as I am observing losses, I am observing holes in the packet sequence numbers, or there is some other mechanism. Now, the packet sequence number is something which is very hard to use in practice because first, I mean, the size of the loss in the packet sequence number vary with the congestion window. And second, it also depends on things like number skipping by the sender. And so what you have there, you have a primary ACK delay. You might want to have an ACK reordering delay or something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You are right that I'm mentally kind of conflating the two as being sufficiently similar to serve both purposes, and you're right that it's possible they're not sufficiently similar. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know, John, did you want to go next, or should we let the queue go and have Martin go? Is your response directly a response to Christian or John?
If it's all right, I mean, I think I don't quite understand the issue that Christian's having. At a high level, basically, packet threshold is already there in fight, and the problem with this particular with the ACK delay is that we effectively we don't have packet threshold loss detection anymore. And what this proposal does is it brings it back. So it's not that we're bringing a new mechanism here. We are simply reinstating a mechanism that we lost because of this extension. Does that make sense to you, Christian? I'm not quite. Maybe, I mean, to some extent, we'll have to discuss this on the issue, and part of this is just bringing it up so we can discuss.
Yeah, we should have that discussion on the
96.
Issue. I mean, because I mean, if we go back and forth, I mean, trying to explain that verbally, it's going to be long.
Yeah, and we've got like 4.5 minutes to go here. So we're happy to have this discussion on the issue about how important it is, but please look at 96 and we can talk about it then.
Okay, that makes sense to me, especially given our time. Martin?
Okay, so of this, I think maybe I can understand what you're trying to do. I'm not sure about the first subtraction here. I'd like a picture because I'm not smart enough to do this. The purpose of this discussion was so that people could understand what's going on. I suspect this is probably something along the lines of the right solution here, but I don't know. And so, can you just list a list and get some feedback that way?
Sorry, Martin's voice broke off. I suspect because of your mic being on.
Yeah. Or because of mine.
Can you repeat the last part, Martin? Sorry.
Request that you bring this to the list and provide some, I guess, better explanatory material than just a single slide with text on it. Maybe just because it's a very long day in the middle of a very long week, but I'm not smart enough to work at this.
Yeah, once again, I think that the issue has some discussion on it, but that's perfectly reasonable and fair. I think part of our goal here was to bring attention to this issue because it's the only design issue that's left and pending. And I think that either ways, we'll be able to come to a decision on it once we get people's eyes and minds staring at it. So, yeah, I mean, I think we'd be happy to do something on email if that's necessary. And it'd be a restating of what's on the issue already, but that's happily done.
Yeah, sorry. I kind of thought I had sent this to the list, but I must have failed to actually hit send on that email or something. So apologies, that's my bad. Vicky.
Thanks, Ian. I think it's better. Reordering threshold is better than ignore order. It gives you a little bit more options than, just true and false. But as I think Christian, what he said, I think I agree with him. So if there's a reordering threshold, it can be either in time or in packets. I think maybe we can make this field either two fields or make this make a way to distinguish whether we are setting this in time or packets. But the other thing I wanted to say was this is again the same issue that I had raised with ignore order or ignore CE is what is the guidance? Somebody could set it very high and that just becomes the same as ignore order. Even if they're not setting it as 0, they can still set it very high. So I'm not sure if the guidance and the how the sender is setting this, if that there's guidance for how to set this in the draft.
I think there's no additional guidance. I thought we added guidance recently. Jana, I think, wrote a PR to add guidance for other use cases, and this would apply, and so we'd have to make sure that guidance got applied to this.
Yeah, I don't think we have. I mean, the PR for this is not fully fleshed out yet. I think that's definitely good feedback. I think we need to have something that's more precise in terms of what does an endpoint do if they don't have anything better that they can use, or they don't have. Having a default in there is going to be very useful, and I think we can default back to quick V1 defaults, but it'll be good to state that explicitly so that people know what to do.
Okay, thank you.
Gori, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for doing this, and I do see it progressing. That's really good. I have two questions. The first one, I think you've already touched on, which I think there is some element of safety in here. If you get these numbers wildly wrong, then there is a congestion control implication. So I would really love to see some sort of safety considerations or recommended maximums or something. Maybe we can discuss that later on the issue. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. We can either discuss it on this issue or on other issues. Yeah, I'm happy. It needs to be discussed. I think we all agree. I just want to make sure we get the right text in there and it applies to all the various mechanisms we have. And it's kind of a global recommendation. So I think we're all on the same page. It's just a matter of making sure we actually get the right text written down. So yeah,
that's kind of why I asked that, because I think it probably is better handled as a separate thing once we've got the issues pinned down.
Right. Yeah, I think having one text section that kind of says here are all the ways you could shoot yourself or the internet in the foot. Don't do these things, and here's why. Is kind of what we need to have. And
then my second point is even more crazy than I think what Vidi raised. I mean, I'm not convinced that ignore CE is in any way what the people who are designing L4S are imagining. And I wonder what the impact of actually deploying an ignore CE thing without some very strong guidance would be on the whole L4S thing.
Yeah, we could add some notes about how that ignore CE is not necessarily recommended for L4S specifically.
Or we should just form a little bit of a separate issue that they can jump into, perhaps on that one.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm out of time. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you want to go, John?
If I might add something that quickly to Gori, this isn't ignore CE is not really designed to handle L4S. It's more of an escape hatch for those for L4S in the sense that if you don't have any acts coming back, you don't have any accurate ECN feedback. And so this sort of currently defeats any accurate ECN that you might want to do. So it's an escape hatch. It's not precisely defined as a solution for L4S, just to be clear.
We're just discussing
Folks,
away.
yeah, we're at time
Sounds
here,
good.
so I ask you politely to keep up this healthy discussion on the list and the issues. Thank you, Ian, for the presentation. Your last slide talked about working group best call. It seems there's still a few, well, this design issue and a few more issues to go. Another question the chair is probably asking is about implementation and interoperability of the act frequency. I know there has been some, but if other people are doing that, that would help us understand how mature this draft is and how good it is. But beyond that, I think we'll need to move on to the next slide. So once again, thank you, Ian.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Robin's up next with Qlog. Do you want to? There we go. The system works. Thank you. Go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, I'm intelligible, I hope, since we had a few issues on that on Monday. So it's short update on Qlog because not that much happened for the latest draft in the past 3 months. The main thing we did was move to a different serialization format. And just to give a little bit of context on that, as you know, we use JSON for the main format, which is very nice. It's well supported. The main downside is that it's quite not very robust in most of the parsers. For example, here, if you would forget the final square bracket in this example, most of the parsers would simply break. They wouldn't even give you a partial result there. This means typical JSON is not very usable for streaming cases because there you often might not have the option to properly finish the JSON file, or let's say if your implementation crashes before they can finish the full log. So what we did initially was define a separate additional format next to that, for which we chose new line delimited JSON, which is exactly what it sounds like. You just, instead of having proper JSON, you just have each JSON object as a separate line, and you can just use the new line as a delimiter, which is very simple, works quite well. The main downside there is that it has no official RFC. So if you would use that, we would have to define a lot of these basics in the Qlog drafts themselves, basically. A smaller downside is that you can't have new lines inside of the JSON itself, which is a bit annoying if you're doing like manual grabbing or actually eyeballing the Qlog files. Because these events are typically very, very long if you do them on a single line. So that's what we had last time. And then I think it was Martin Thompson who suggested, how about we move to RFC 7464 instead, which is, if you don't know, it's called JSON text sequences. And this is actually very, very similar in concept to new line delimited JSON. Instead of new lines, you're now using the existing ASCII record separator character. So this is not actually a string, so it's just because it's a binary character, it's difficult to visualize in the slide. So the RS with the brackets is actually just a single Unicode code point indicating the record separator character. So the nice thing there is this is properly defined in an RFC. It's properly defined how to use it, how it maps to scratch that. And we can have new lines inside of events, which is also quite nice. The main downside was this seems to be relatively esoteric. It isn't as broadly supported as new line delimited JSON, despite being a standard. And so we decided we first want to get some practical experience with this before we switch the Qlog format over to that, which is what we did. And so it turns out it's actually quite feasible, quite doable. If you're already doing MD JSON, it's very easy to move over to JSON text sequences in practice. And we also tested various existing tool suites or tools that people were using for Qlog, like JQ and all kinds of Linux-based text processing tools, and they all seem to work just fine with this new format. So that's the reason why we decided let's go for it. And so that's the main change in draft 01. We moved from ND-JSON to this. With that, some fewer additional minor changes. We have semantic versioning now. We have a little bit of more information on using different file extensions for the different formats, and also have some more information on the media types that you might use when say, sending these things over HTTP. This was then picked up quite quickly. We have support for this in the QVIS tool suite, and we also have several implementations that have moved to the newest format, and everything seems to work just fine. So 2 points I want to make there. First, it's not that we're moving everything over to this. We are still supporting both JSON and JSON text sequences, so non-streaming file-based and streaming, let's say. But if you were, for some reason, waiting for this change to be made to update your own implementation, I think it's fair to say that we'll likely stay with this streaming format. So if you were waiting for this, you can probably go ahead and start implementing that. So that's since last time. What are we planning for the near future? By IETF 113, we're hoping to mainly do some editorial work. And the main thing there is that in the current drafts, all of our events, we've tried to properly define them, which fields are on which events and which type are those fields. But for those, we are currently using the TypeScript data definition format. And here we have a very similar situation to ND-JSON. It's usable, but it's not really well defined anywhere, and it's not an RFC. And so here again, we also want to make the move to something a bit more IETF centric, which is called the Concise Data Definition Language, CDDL. As you can see, it's very similar in concept. It's just mainly the syntax that changes a little bit. But the main gain we hope to get from this, especially down the line, is that CDDL should make it easier for us to automatically extract event definitions, schema definitions in different formats and programming languages, and also use those to build automatic validators for QLog files, which is something that we are currently missing a bit. So the goal is there to hopefully have something like in tools like QVIS, that you upload a QLog file and that it can tell you exactly if you have any errors in there, misspelled fields, wrong types of fields, and so on and so forth, which is something we've seen surface a little bit in the past months for some people. So that's kind of the idea. It's both to make everything a bit more neat IETF style, but also be more robust towards the future when we start adding new stuff. So this is what I think we have in mind for next IETF 113. And then after that, our main goals are to basically flesh out what we have. We are a bit lacking in TLS and QPAC stuff at this moment, so we want to add those things. And then we have a few events that need to be extended or touched up to be a bit clearer. And then there are some proposals to add more high-level generalized stuff, like indicating which CPU or which thread a certain event comes from, that kind of stuff that other implementations like Microsoft use in their custom logging format that might be useful down the line. And that's basically it. Like last time I had in my slides like a desire to have like a global design guideline or a design framework so that people could add new events and new protocols even to QLog and so on and so forth. And since we've had a lot of discussion about that, and I think most people there agree that this is a bit of a utopia, that it would be quite difficult to achieve this. And even if we could, it's probably not something we want to do within the quick working group for the current QLog effort. And so the idea here would be to limit ourselves quite relatively to Quick and HTTP3, and then look into all these other stuff later on, which is fine for me, but I think that means that we need a very clear idea of how to do that later on already now, or at least provide enough extension points down the line to make this relatively possible. And that's something that is on this slide, and that especially Lucas has been creating some issues for in the past weeks. That we need to start thinking about versioning and versioning of individual documents, individual event groupings. We need to think about how to indicate which protocols and which events are in which file, how to make it possible to change existing events, for example, add new transport parameters into the existing transport parameter event that we have, and so on and so forth. And then we should also have a discussion about, let's say we want QLog events for wrap transports. How do we do that? Is that a separate draft? Is it a fully separate thing? Where does that live? And so on and so forth. So a few of those practical issues. Those are not things that are very pressing at this moment, but it would be nice to have an idea of what people think about this, or to have some proposals of this by IETF 113, so that we can start the discussion in earnest by then. So that's what I have for you today. Please, if you have any questions.
Go ahead, Kazuho.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for making the changes. Regarding the file format, I prefer choosing one rather than having support for two, because in my opinion, supporting two is always more complex than supporting one and writing a conversion tool to the other.
Yeah, but even if we have two formats, it's still possible to just implement one and then converting to the other if you want, right? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Right. I mean, if there's only one format defined, then, for example, I can create a tool that only supports that format. But if there are two formats being defined, I'm forced to write a converter or at least write a test to support both two, and that's a complexity, I think.
Yep.
For everyone was.
So you would propose moving to just a single defined format?
Yes.
Yep.
Regardless of whichever. Thank you.
Omer?
Thanks, Kazuho. Yeah, Omer.
Now I can hear you. Yep.
All right. Regarding the RS separated QLog, are the semantics of aggregating multiple logs into a single aggregated log going to be understood by the tools, or is it something that's undefined behavior?
Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons I would have two different formats. I didn't want to get too deep into that with Kazuo, but I have a second question. So if you have the normal JSON one, we can append separate traces as individual objects. That's much more difficult in streaming format. If you want to do that in streaming format, you would have to indicate for each individual event to which subtrace it belongs. Otherwise, it's impossible to demultiplex them afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you.
But finalizing on that is something that QVIS, for example, also already does. It's not that it's very complex, it's just a different way of doing things.
Cool. Well, it doesn't seem like we've got anyone else in the queue. I think there's some good progress here and some good progress to come. I did see in the chat, Christian mentioned multipath support. I think, sometimes defining these events takes some thinking, but it isn't too hard. It's more the what makes sense to put in and what are people willing to implement. Because you can define everything, and if no one implements them, then you can end up with some interop issues. Like we found in the hackathon last week when we were consuming each other's QLogs. So I think there's some good work to come up, and look forward to that progress in the future. But if there's nothing more here, I think we could just move on.
For multipath, I was intentionally waiting a bit for the unified proposal, right? To know what direction we're going in. Once that's settled down, I think it should be relatively easy to add at least provisional multipath events, and then also have some basic, let's say, QVIS tooling around that to help with multipath debugging.
Yep, cool. Well, thank you, Robin. And with that, we can move on to version negotiation. So, David, would you like to step on up, please?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, everyone. Let me find these slides. All right. Can someone confirm that you can hear me and see the slides?
I can confirm.
Cool, thanks. My name is David Skenazy, and I'm here to very, very briefly give folks an update on the version negotiation draft. So a very accelerated history. We used to have VN in the core specs. We then decided to remove it and split it to its own draft. This is that draft. We went around in circles for a bit on it because it was too complicated. Then MT came around with a simpler design that folks liked. That's in the draft today. And then the question is, where do we go from here? So far, the new simplified design, I haven't heard anyone said they dislike it, so we're in good shape. We still have a lot of minor issues on the document. It's more that just the editors haven't been focusing on it, so we haven't made good progress on those. But like all the ones, I did a quick pass on those last week, and it really looked like there was agreement on how to resolve all of them. The question is kind of what is the status with implementations? For the longest time, we didn't have one. I just on Monday, I implemented it in our stack, not the compatible part, but the at least the version downgrade part, and it was very straightforward. And kind of the question for the working group is, where do we want to go from here? Do we want to publish this soon? Do we want to wait until we have another version so we can like test the compatibility bits at scale before we ship this? We'd kind of like to get some sort of a timeline, because if this needs to get published soon, then that it's worth it for the editors to prioritize like fixing these editorial things. Otherwise, we can kind of kick this can down the road until another version. So thoughts, questions, what do we do now? This is the end of my presentation. Crickets. So if one thing is, please interrupt with my server. I put it on the general channel of the Slack. Just want to make sure that I implemented it correctly. But apart from that, given that there's not too much excitement about this, I guess maybe we just kind of kick the can down the road a bit further. Matt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna, hearing the deafening silence from the working group. I think like everyone agrees that this is something we need, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of implementation appetite at the moment. I think for something like this, we do want implementations and interop before we kind of shepherd it through. So just everyone keep that in mind, that if you want this in the future, if you foresee this being something that you want in the future, please implement it sooner rather than later. Gianna, did you just want to say something?
Hey, thanks for the presentation, David. Just very quickly, it seems to me that it might actually be useful to get some implementation and deployment experience along with a different version. So I wonder if the quick V2 discussion that we're about to have later might play into how quickly we move on this draft.
That makes sense, because if we have a V2 that is compatible with the first one, that'll help us to use this at scale. Also, we won't be able to ship a V2 without a version negotiation mechanism with V1. So like, yeah, maybe these become a joint cluster. And I think the quick V2 is on the as time permits. So in that case, I'll just say let's punt for now, but let's see what comes out of the V2 discussion. All right, and expect a similar 2-minute presentation at the next IETF then. Thanks, everyone.
All right, since I'm already on the mic, yeah, as we can see, Martin's coming up with quick LB. So go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I'm in the staying in the vein of things that people sort of support but are a little bit. Can I get a clock reset, please? Things that people support but aren't a lot of implementations. Quick LB. So at 111, I talked about a lot of technical issues, and basically that the draft had expanded to cover lots of use cases because we weren't getting a lot of useful feedback of what the most important use cases were. The upshot of that was people thought it was too complicated, too many choices, and I agreed with that. And then, of course, the other concern is there weren't a ton of implementations, particularly on the server side, and no interop activity to date that I'm aware of. So some things have happened here. Christian Uitema has been incredibly valuable in fixing the now very much misnamed stream cipher algorithm into something that is a little more secure. We've kind of just cleaned up some of the nomenclature to kind of make it less 3 completely disjoint algorithms, but just three different sets of options to kind of the same core structure. So that's just a simplification thing. And add a couple drafts ago was dynamic server ID allocation, not pre-configuring that. And I think we've reached consensus that it's a little too cute and there's too many difficult mechanisms associated with that. So that's gone again. And then I've heard some good news about implementations, but I haven't seen anything concrete yet. Again, like I know there are a lot of server implementers in the room, and that is where we are hurting most. If you have a quick server implementation, many of you do, and you would like to create some connection ID generation logic, we have load balancers that can interact with you, and that would be helpful. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of my dream on how this can move forward. Christian and I have asked for a CFRG review of the stream cipher algorithm, since Christian came up with something that was kind of a variant of FFX. So we've kind of rolled our own crypto. So we're going through that process now. Not sure exactly what the reaction will be. If that goes well and it shows that we have the same or similar security properties to the block cipher algorithm, it's not clear to me what the value of the block cipher algorithm is. There's an issue in the GitHub if you want to weigh in on this, but essentially you'd be getting longer CIDs. The only benefit would be fewer crypto passes, which seems like a not that strong advantage. And then that would dramatically simplify the document. You essentially have a plain text version and a server text version of the same thing. So that would be about as simple as you could get. I really would like to split the load balancer portion of this and the retry service portion of this. I view them as entirely orthogonal to each other. The load balancer thing is essentially version invariant with a few caveats, and the retry service thing really is not. And I'm getting proposals for things like stateless, reset offload, and so on. And they all just have like the common theme of middle box coordination, but I don't know if that's a strong enough thread to hold these two things together. I've also just kind of become enamored of the idea that like smaller drafts are better because people read them. And when there's a lot of ancillary stuff that half the people don't care about, it just makes things worse. So I don't know if people have strong opinions about that. I'm gonna be happy to hear from it. Then after, like, if all this goes according to plan and we do another editorial pass, then it'd be as done as it's going to be done. That's just a question of getting a couple implementations and unwrapping them, and then we're done. So let's see. Do I have another slide? Yes. I don't know if we want to talk about the block CID stuff right now. We can get into that if you want. So I'll just open the floor for comments. Ian.
The only thing I had to share is that now that we've kind of worked our way through our backlog of IETF quick work and other areas. We are very excited to hopefully take this on in the first half of 2022. But there's still some details to be worked out in terms of who's going to do the work and everything. But the use cases are there and everything. But that, to be said, to be clear, that's like the stream cipher protocol with like the key rotation and all of those sort of mechanisms, the key exchange portion and all that stuff. We probably will support at some point in the future, but that's like more of a year from now or more probably sort of thing. So I think that probably supports the idea that, at least in our case, you're going to get a deployment on one of them a lot earlier than you're going to get deployment on the other half, but I don't know.
Are you talking about the retry service versus the load balancing?
Yes, sorry, that's what I meant.
Okay, yeah, all right,
Yeah.
super, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, that's the other thing, like, if we get a lot of implementations in one, I anticipate the implementations of one of those components versus the other to be very asymmetric, and if one's ready to go, I'd just like to move it. And at some point, I'll produce a mock-up of what these things would look like and let people shoot at it. Lucas.
Hey, Martin. I'm just curious, have you had any feedback to say that the proposed split is not desirable? Has anyone kind of said that they wouldn't like that?
I brought it up like a long time ago and got like I think it's like 5 or 6 meetings ago and got some negative, like a little bit negative pushback. It wasn't super strong. I'm become more convinced of this. I'm bringing it up again. And you know, I don't think I haven't really discussed this on a list much recently. I will do so, but this is I'm kind of introducing the topic now, frankly, to allow people to comment.
Okay, that's cool. I think the list is a good venue to continue that thing. I'm chair hat off and personal opinion. If splitting them is going to help make some progress on the one thing that people really do want to implement, that seems like a benefit. But I'm not fully au fait with LB to know what the potential downside might be for that split.
I mean, they're functionally completely. I mean, they can in theory be implemented on the same device, but there's no real relationship between the two. They're together because they were, again, under the theme of middle box cooperation, which is a pretty weak thread in my view. So there's a comment in the chat about they missed the CFRG email. That's because we didn't actually go directly to CFRG. Upon the advice of the security ADs, we contacted a couple people directly. If other people would like to provide a crypto review of specifically section 5.2, the stream cipher CID, like that would be very welcome. I received the advice it would be better to actually contact people directly. Any Matt, are you in the queue, or are you just?
I'm mostly hanging out, but I was going to say one thing, which is that I was curious what your, from a chair perspective, what is your opinion on this necessity for interop? For, you know, are we comfortable, like, because it seems like there hasn't been a lot of design issues or things recently besides the things you mentioned, and so
yeah,
do we wait on interop? Do we wait on, and do we have to interop everything, or and deploy it, or what? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
So I have like two concerns with maturity. I'm beyond just kind of my ideal path and how this proceeds. I have two concerns about maturity. Number one is that the document is written in a way that it's implementable, because obviously I knew what I meant when I implemented it, which it doesn't mean a ton. And then the second thing, and I hope that especially Google's intentions are helpful here. Like actually trying to deploy this thing and developing some. Like we have sort of a configuration model that has some assumptions, and it would be really nice to like test that against actual production somehow. So I'm really eager to hear, to hear like what the issues are with Google, and like what the rough edges on sort of the assumptions we make on how to configure things, and like what the pain points are. I know that my co-author Nick Banks has like been working with Azure on this stuff, and it hasn't gone super well in terms of getting them to provide good feedback. So those are the only reasons other than just like the cleanup and the draft, those are the reasons those are the two things where I just don't want to like hit the WGLC button right now. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to give back the balance of my time. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. That's very kind of you. Okay, so Mira's jumping in the queue. It's time for the new work topic. So Mira, take it away on the topic of multipath extension.
Okay, hello everybody. So yeah, I'm Mirja. I'm presenting a new draft here, but effectively this is not new work. There has been previously 3 different drafts, and as you can see here on this new draft, we have a set of authors that actually combines the authors from the previous draft, so does the content of the draft. So let's move to the next slide. I have to I can control this myself. Okay, yeah, so what happened so far? Lucas already mentioned that we had an interim meeting about a year ago where we talked about quick use cases, mainly requirements. And since then, there was a lot of work. People have been working on implementations. There were 3 different proposals. And in order to move forward from here, we somehow needed to agree what the right way is to move forward, like combining those proposals and getting one way out of this. So I got in touch with all the authors from all the drafts, and there was already a lot of agreement about what to do, and everybody was like on board for having one unified solution immediately. So we had a site meeting only a few weeks ago where we discussed how to move forward here. And as a result of that, we recently published this new draft, which does take parts of the other 3 drafts. So this presentation will give you an overview about what's the focus in the new draft and what's in the new draft. And this is the most important outcome from all the discussion we had, is that the new draft is really focusing on the core components. So in the other 3 drafts, there were always parts which were like not core components, which were things like QE handling, address discovery, and this kind of things. And in order to move forward, we really want to focus on those things that are needed to establish multipath usage of multiple paths simultaneously. So that means the current draft as a core component has, of course, the negotiation of a new extension. It has a minimal set of path management that is needed about setting up and close new paths or old paths in that case. It talks a little bit about scheduling, but that's really minimal at this point. We probably need a few more words, but don't want to talk about it extensively, only what's needed to make it work. And then it talks about how to actually transmit and retransmit packets. So that's it. That's the core. Everything else that has been previously discussed, like more advanced scheduling mechanisms or unidirectional passes, address discovery, or any kind of QoS handling, these are things that could come up later on in additional drafts, or could be additional extensions on top of that. So the other thing that we had like very broad agreement on is that one of the important design principles here is to use as much as possible from RFC 9000. And this is also kind of the feedback I not only got from the authors, but from everybody else I talked to, like, please keep this as simple as possible. And that means make minimal set of changes here. And we actually try to do that. So what we don't change is path validation. We completely keep it as it is in quick version 1 and as used for path migration. We don't have to change basically anything about congestion control, because congestion control was always per path. So when you had migration, you had to reset your congestion control, and now you have to run multiple congestion controls in parallel for each path. We didn't change the header format, and also didn't change anything in the zero RTT packets. So everything that we do for multipath is done for 1 RTT packets. There is another design principle which is kind of important, is that we define a path as a 4-tuple. That makes some assumptions easier, and it mainly means that you can only have 1 path per 4-tuple. So what did we change, or what did we add? I probably have to say what we add is that we kind of not only want migration, but we actually want simultaneous use of multiple paths. So that means that you can send non-probing frames on multiple paths at the same time. So this is something that is not allowed by RFC 9000, and that's something we want to enable here. So that's one change. And the other change is that we now that you have like multiple open paths, you also have to care about clothing those paths. So that's some additional mechanics that we added here. But it's also not a lot of stuff, I have to say. There are a few additional considerations about recovery and, for example, RTT estimation. These all depend a little bit about how you kind of implement ACKing and packet number spaces, because you really need to figure out for RTT estimation and loss recovery which packet was sent on which path, and depending on what solution you choose for your packet number spaces, that might be easier or harder. Before I talk more about packet number spaces, which is like one of the open points, I just show you on the next slide what we are proposing to do in this draft right now. So what we have in the draft right now is that you can actually negotiate either use of one packet number space or use of multiple packet number space, or you can indicate in the handshake that you support both. If both ends support both implementations, you will use multiple packet number space. That is actually not in the current 0.0 draft version, but that's a PR we already merged into the next update because that wasn't clearly specified. So what does it mean, one packet number or multiple packet number? It's easy. So with one packet number space, every packet you want to send out gets a new packet number in order, and then you decide to send it out on one or the other pass. So you might send out packet one on one pass and packet on the other pass. If you have multiple packet number spaces, the packet numbers are independent on each path. And you can have packet one on pass number one, and you can have packet one on pass number two, but you have to identify which path this was sent on. We had those two options in the negotiation and in the specification of the current version of the draft, but this is to enable evaluation and implementation experience. There's no intention to publish this kind of negotiation for the final version of this extension in any RFC. But we propose to actually take it on in a working group like this so we can get more experience here and make progress and have more discussion about this. So on this slide, I try to, on a high level, summarize the current discussion about packet number spaces and why it's not easy to make a decision right away. We had some discussion about this in the side meeting. There's also a nice slide set from Christian Hüttemar about this if you want to learn more. But you know, the high level message on this slide is there are pros and cons for both of the approaches. So I think I'm starting with the cons for single packet number space here. So the cons for the single packet number space is actually it is kind of easy. The pros, sorry, it's kind of easy to implement. It's only a few lines of code that you need to add or change. And the other pro is also that it does work with zero-length connection ID. The cons are that you can come into a situation where you actually increase your ACK frame size noticeably. So especially if you have two paths which have very different latencies, you might get a lot of reordering. You can be smart about how you schedule your packets or how you create your ACKs and try to reduce that. But the problem or the con maybe is that you have to be smart. It's not straightforward. You have to do it right. And maybe there's also more chance for doing something wrong. On the multiple packet number spaces, you don't have that problem, so that's one of the big cons. It's very clear which packet belongs to which path. There's no ambiguity about where the packet was lost or about when you calculate the round trip time or anything like that. Your ACK frames are smaller and clear, and so the logic that you have to implement is easier. However, you have to have more code. More lines of code, and you have to have code that is specific for this extension only and might not be used in a single pass implementation or setup. The other drawback of the multiple packet number space is that currently we have to require connection IDs in both directions to make this work, but that is actually something that is under discussion, and maybe we come up with some smart ideas here as well. Effectively, I don't think I want to discuss this topic here today. I think what we need and what I said earlier is we need more implementation experience and feedback about this, and then hopefully have this discussion further in the working group instead of making a decision right here. Yeah.
Interject. We have a few people in the queue.
Yes, I was trying to look at this right now. Let's actually break here and take those questions.
If you're okay with that, Miri, I'd like to keep this on for clarifying questions for what's been said already. We'll have time for discussion at the end. So, Kazuho, please fire away.
Miri, thanks for the presentation. I have one question. So one of the slides says that a path is defined as 4 tuple being bidirectional. Does that mean that if you receive packets on path X, you have to send ACK for those packets on path X?
No, it means that you have to be able to receive packets on that path, and that's something that you check during path validation. But how to schedule packets and how to schedule your X is I think actually not specified that much in the draft currently. That's left to the implementation. So there's no requirement to send the X on the same path.
Thank you.
Chapa.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have read the merge draft. So I just got one comment. So I suggest that maybe we can add some use case or some paragraph in the introduction to describe explicitly. So how we can use that and be quick. So the reason is, so now you should know that the 3PP R18 has the release 18 has discussed the IETF for a long time, and several companies strong support to add the multi-path functionalities into the IETF to achieve the traffic splitting or even redundant transmissions. So I think I think one of the valuable things here is that so perhaps we can complete a MP quick work just before the completion of the release 18, and then we can try to adopt this RFC into the release 18. That's maybe it's a good way to make this draft to implement into the real world case. So actually, I submitted a use case draft for this meeting, so I'm not sure whether I can share my screen for some time, or I can just simply describe that the draft.
We're short of time. We need to focus on the discussion here. So yeah, we need to just keep this to clarifying questions about the presentation.
Okay, so okay, let me simply describe. So I just have point out
So
there.
can I interrupt you for a second? I agree with you. I think this is a very important use case, and I'm supporting that as well. We should maybe have some more discussion in future, but probably not in this meeting. So I think in this meeting, we should figure out what are the basic concepts that we want to see in a draft, and then move forward and have this discussion later, if that's okay for you.
Okay, so perhaps yeah, once we have agreed on the basic setup, quick so maybe for the extension, so we can consider to add some introduction and some descriptions about how to advertise the draft into different organizations. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that might be rather a separate draft than something in the introduction.
Yeah.
But yeah, something to consider later.
Yeah,
thanks.
Gianna?
Thanks. A very quick clarifying question. Miria, you said that the decision between these two choices would require more implementation experience. And Matt said on chat that this would be the first design decision that we would make if this draft were to be adopted. Those two are very different points, and I don't need it right now, but it'd be useful to clarify what exactly the path forward would be, because I would like to push against something which I'm not going to do right now, but this is asking for clarification for what that would be.
So if you ask me, I think, for example, people deciding to only implement one or the other, is good input for this group. If everybody at the end decides to only implement one of the approaches, then we have a decision. We don't need much discussion about it. But I'm also pretty sure that depending on the stack you're having, your implementation experience might be different. So more input would be valuable here, because based on the implementations we have so far, we can see that the implementation of single number packet space is easier, but we also didn't evaluate a lot of the logic that you have to implement there, and if that actually works very well. So more work is needed from my point of view, but maybe Matt wants to say more.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that, I kind of agree with Jana that it's a design issue, but I think what you're saying is actually kind of the same, which is that Maria, what you're saying is you want input from implementers about which design they think works with their implementation, not necessarily that you think everyone should go implement both and then be like, oh, I like this one better. All right.
No. Yep, that's totally it.
Spencer?
Spencer, do you want to?
Sorry, I was just waiting for somebody to tell me if we were finished. I wanted to thank you all for doing this work a lot. Maria, I've been talking about a strategy of sending acts on different paths, which you're leading up to the implementations for now, and I'm not arguing about that. My clarifying question was, does that work with one sequence space, multiple sequence spaces, both, or neither?
Sorry, does what work?
Sending acts on a different path.
That is completely independent. You can even if you have a different packet number space, you can send it on a different path because the act doesn't identify the packet number space you're identifying.
I'm clarified. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to read the chat at the same time, which doesn't work. So you have to come to the queue and talk to me.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, Amelia. So what I want to ask is, does the multipath quick also cover the Datacron extension?
Yes,
Yes.
These
Okay.
extensions are completely independent, so you can implement both and use both.
Okay, so you don't see special challenges here, and the description of multipath quick is completely agnostic to that. Okay, nevertheless, my question is specific to the packet number spaces. So as you know, we are developing the multipath DCCP, which I think has a similar kind of similar characteristics to the multipath quick, especially when we think about a multipath quick with the Datacron extension, because then we have an unreliable transmission, which has some challenges to multipath. And in that respect, we explicitly decided to use multiple PN spaces for MP-DCCP because it has some positive effect if it comes to reordering. So it supports us in our reordering approach, and I think that's quite important, or that you should consider if you discuss the packet number spaces, if it should be a single one or a multiple one. So have in mind that multipath plus Datacron has some special demands, and maybe multiple PN spaces can support here.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the details of DCCP, but I think it's different here because for Datagram and Quick, you already still know when a packet gets lost. You just don't resubmit it because you have a packet number.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the same in DCCP. So you are aware of a packet gets lost. Nevertheless, you maybe want to reorder packets without retransmission, without requiring retransmission, and then multiple PN spaces can help to make fast decisions in the reordering process if a packet get lost, or it's worth to wait for it.
I just gotta interject here as a chat. This is interesting chat. We can have this on the list and on issues. Yeah. It's kind of beyond the scope of clarification. So thanks, Marcus. But yeah, we'll follow up on that one.
Yep.
We're gonna. Do you want to progress through the slides, Maria?
Yes. Let's go through the remaining few slides just to tell you what's in the draft. Not much left here. So as I said, there is something about path management, path initiation. It works very similar than path validation. We take path validation as it is from RFC 9000, no changes. The only change is that afterwards, after the validation has completed, you can actually send non-problem packets on multiple paths. Path validation can also be only initiated by the client, so that's a restriction that we could further discuss in the working group, but that's what's currently in the draft. The thing that we did add was path removal, because with migration, you don't need to remove a path. You move over, you close the old path immediately. With multipath support, you have multiple paths, so you have to care about how to close them. There is a new frame here, which is called path abandon frame. But we also reuse the retire connection ID frame to actually signal that resources can be released, and we also rely on timeouts as it's done in RFC 9000. So basically, what we do here is we from a semantics point of view, we have two new frame types. One is the path abandoned frame. This carries a path identifier, error code, and reason frame. And there is also a path identifier type, which indicates if the path identifier belongs to basically the source or destination ID or to the current path if no connection ID is present. So effectively, you can send this frame on any path. If you have a connection ID, if you don't have a connection ID, you can only send it over the path that you want to abandon. So if you have a connection ID, you have like more flexibility here in providing this signal to the other end. Then we also have a new egg multipath frame. This is only used if you have multiple packet number spaces, but this extension is also minimal. It's really like the old egg frame. It only has one additional field which identifies the packet number space. Yeah. So that's kind of what's in the draft. Again, we really try to focus on the core components that are needed to use multiple paths simultaneously. All the authors have agreed on some key design principles, which is really try to keep it as simple as possible, just add minimal stuff. And we are aligned with that. I think that was also what came out of the site meeting. We have this option currently to negotiate multiple packet number space, one or multiple packet number spaces, but this is really for experimentation. So please, if you go implement, decide if you want to implement one or both of them and report back, so we can make a decision for one of those approaches at some point. But I think this is ready to take on by the working group and move the discussion back into the working group. At the site meeting, there was a lot of interest. There was also people talking about implementation. So I think it would be great to have this in the working group, and so we are asking if this is ready for adoption.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we've got some time for discussion now. There's a lot of potential things that people could say about cool ideas they've got or potential issues they might see, but we'd like to keep the discussion here focused on the question about viewpoints on whether we think this draft should be adopted or not. Towards the end of the 8 minutes we have here, we'll take a show of hands as well before taking any question to the list. But yeah, if people could keep it on the topic of adoption, that would greatly help the chairs. So John is first in the queue. Please go.
Thank you for the presentation, Maria. It was very helpful. At a high level, I would say that the document that lays out all possible designs, I would argue, is not ready for adoption, simply because it's a superset of all the things that we might want to do. Now, I haven't read the draft yet, so I'll admit that first. But
can I interrupt you here for 1 second? So we're not laying
sure.
out all possible designs. We really try to concentrate on the minimum. But it was, and there was a lot of things where the 3 different drafts you look at, like we actually found a lot of agreement, and the authors are all aligned on these points. It's really just the packet number space, because as you have seen on the slide, there's no clear good solution, right? So rather than trying to take any kind of choice now and then maybe revise it later because we're figuring out this is not the right thing to do, we left those 2 options in there, only for this one issue.
Understood, but it's a pretty fundamental issue. I mean, the packet number space issue drives a lot of questions.
It doesn't. It's really a very detailed implementation thing. It doesn't change any of the functionality or any of the principles you want to have in this draft. It's really about implementation.
So I would have to read the draft, I suppose. I mean, I'll take that back to myself. That's feedback to me. However, I'll say that if we can resolve that issue before we talk about adoption, that will be helpful, because to me, the ultimately we are defining a protocol here. It's not rocket science, and the protocol is about the details. And the use of path ID or not, the use of separate packet numbers or not, actually, again, to me, it should make a difference, a big difference in how the protocol is designed. So I would argue that take it for what it's worth, but I haven't read the draft, so I won't make it too strongly. I would say that my point is we should resolve that issue before we really talk about adopting the document.
So point taken, but also I think what we have right now is that, and that was also what was in previous drafts already, that we have two specifications and they can work together. We have identified what are the things that overlap and have described them in the respective way. So if we make a decision for one or the other at some point, we just go ahead and remove parts of the draft and that's it. It's not like we have to redesign the rest because we separated those things nicely. So I think this is really a small part only. And rather than trying to kind of get ourselves stuck on this kind of minor implementation point, I think we should move forward and we should make sure that everything is in well shape and incentivize people to implement this and give a clear signal that we actually want to work on this and come to a conclusion.
Just based on some of the chat that we're having and John's point there about not having read the draft, I'm just going to take a quick show of hands for who has actually read this already. So we're going to use the Meet Echo tool for this. And the question is going to be quite simple. Have you read the draft? And you can raise your hand to say you have. And I'm going to start that now and we'll run that. So. Give us like another 20 seconds or so. Yeah, you can click do not raise.
I read the prior drafts, but not this version. Like I read the IDs before they were merged. What should I answer?
Maybe no, because I think for this question, it's actually important that you understand what the difference is.
Just want to clarify.
Okay, I'm gonna close the poll now. We have 20 raised hands and 46 did not raise their hands for a total of 66 participants in a meeting of 168 people. So thank you. Kazuho, please.
Regarding design principle, is there design principle regarding the efficiency of the protocol? To give an example, is there a principle that multiple queries should perform as well as quick prevent? I might have missed that, but would hope that be clarified because that would drive the design choices that we make.
So I don't think we have this explicitly in the draft. The design principles that we do list in the draft is what did lead the author team to make the decisions right now. It's not like a comprehensive list. So if you want to make sure this is captured in the draft, then please open an issue.
Yeah, so I mean, before adopting this, I think I hope that we agree on the design goals. I mean, the performance efficiency requirements that we want to meet. Because without agreeing on that, it's so much harder to agree on what the choices that we have to take. That's my.
I mean, I think this needs more discussion because I don't even really understand what such a requirement would mean because, of course, you have different path characteristics if you have multiple paths, right? So you might have one long delay and one short delay path. And if you select the short delay path for a certain application, you have better experience than the long delay path, but it might be different for the other applications. So I don't think this question is actually that easy. I'm happy to discuss it more.
Right.
But it's a fundamental different behavior. So I'm not sure there is like a clear comparison to a single path approach.
Well, so what I was thinking was of a strictly inferior case. Like, for example, for efficient loss recovery, we might need purpose signal back delays, but that's hard to accomplish with single packet number space. So that was the case I was thinking about. Yes. Thank you, anyway.
I mean, I'm also not sure if the answer to that is so clear because you just have to be smart about when and where to send your X. So this is something we need more experience with.
Thank you.
Martin?
Thanks. Yeah, so I've read the draft. I support this work. I support adoption, although I will probably personally not implement it. I don't think we need to resolve the packet number space issue prior to adoption. I will say the reason I support is I think there's a lot of desire for multipath solution, but there are a lot of big experimental questions. And I think of all the transports we have, I think Quick is the best suited to do open internet experience because it'll actually get through the internet, unlike all the other options. I would probably argue it should be an experimental draft. We don't have to settle that now. Thanks.
Tommy?
All right. So I have read the unified draft, and I definitely support adoption of it. I think that the work to unify the draft has greatly improved the proposal as it's come together. This is better than any of the individual drafts, I think. It doesn't have a lot of the excess bits hanging off of it. It's focused and it's minimized, and I think a minimal implementation is exactly the type of thing that we want to adopt here, because otherwise we're going to spend a lot of time getting distracted. So it's the right kind of starting point. So if we think we need to work on multipath, let's do this. And I think this is the time to start to work on multipath. Mature implementations are getting to the point where they need to use it. Our implementation really needs to start looking at this soon, so having something that the working group is looking at is good. There is an open question about packet number spaces. I think that should be better addressed by the working group rather than having the authors try to come up with one thing and not listen to the whole working group. So let's adopt it and figure out that question together.
So we're running on time, but Ian, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I support the last two statements. In our case, we finally finished like connection migration, so I think we finally feel like we have like the bandwidth to really take some of this work on and actually contribute, whereas before we didn't. So I feel like now is the right time. I'd love to get the packet number space issue resolved, but I don't think it needs to be resolved before adoption. But I also don't want to make everyone implement. But I think we can hammer out like that pretty quickly in the working group. The only other comment I'd say is, if we do this, we may want to consider having like a separate 1 hour meeting just for multipath or something for Quick, because I get the impression there are some people who attend the Quick working group who are distinctly uninterested in spending their time on this. But I don't know. You'd have to ask the group about that.
Christian?
I definitely support adoption. That's not surprising. But the big reason I support adoption is exactly what Tommy said. We want the discussion to happen in public to the working group, not in a confined mailing list that is between authors. And if we support adoption, if we get adoption, what will happen is that we'll move the current GitHub repo in which we are discussing, we'll move that to the working group repo where everybody sees it, and we'll have change control and things like that. And I think making the discussions public is a big reason for adoption.
Jana?
So I made the point about not adopting this, but I think that I perhaps the spirit of the question to me now is whether we should work on multipath, and if this is a document we can start from. And to that, my answer would be yes, because there's only one document. And I think that the work on multipath, I think it's a good time to start working on it as a working group. So I would like to change my position that I said earlier to yes, let's adopt it and let's hash out these issues.
Okay, and with that, I think Lucas is we're gonna run 2 polls. So Lucas, you want to describe the polls before you run them?
Yeah, I just want to thank people for their kind of feedback during this discussion and the comments as well. You know, this helps the chairs gauge opinion on this matter. So to that end, I just want to run a poll to see, you know, gauge interest in who thinks that the working group should work on any form of the multipath problem and a multipath extension to Quick to resolve that problem. So I'm going to start that poll now. If you agree, then raise your hand, and if you don't agree, then do not raise your hand. And we're getting a bit short time, so I'm going to close this poll soon. Some results already coming in that look pretty strongly in favor of that the working group should work on this. the results are in the poll tool at the end, but we have 52 raised hands and 3 raised hands. Let's end the session there. For anyone that said that they don't believe we should work on this, do they want to make a comment at the microphone? No? Okay. So in that case, we'll do another poll that about adopting this specific draft as the solution to this. Problem. Let's start that session now. Again, raise your hand if you agree that this draft should be adopted, and do not raise hand if you disagree. Okay, I'm just gonna close that poll too. Again, I'll ask the same question. We have 2 people who didn't raise their hand compared to 46 people that did. If anyone didn't raise their hand and disagrees that we should adopt this draft, did you want to make a comment at the microphone? I don't see anyone. Okay. Cool. We'll take this away as chairs and speak to some people on back channel and do our thing. So stay tuned on the list. We've got Martin Duke now. We've changed the agenda mid-session based on some feedback and the version negotiation chat that was in David's slides. So Martin's going to talk about quick V2 or whatever we might want to call it.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks to Lucas for what was maybe a typo typing this TOO. I've decided to like really embrace that because there's a bike shed about what the version number should be, whether it's actually the numeral 2 or not. So I'll be very brief. Why is there a V2 draft? Number one, when we were talking about greasing the version number, people said we should just roll up a V2 as quickly as we can, and this is that. Number 2, to exercise the version negotiation framework, as David discussed. And then if there's any fixes we need to make, some emergency patches to quick, this could be a vehicle for that. It's a very simple, short and simple draft. It is exactly the same as V1, except for the version number and the SALT and the HKDF labels and sort of the things you're supposed to roll for every version. There are a couple of bike sheds about ALPN and what the version number should be. Those were discussed pretty thoroughly in 111, and nothing's happened since then. So I directed you to that the records of that discussion if you are interested in those questions. So I guess I think it's about as ready to adopt as it ever will be. If people want to implement this and take it to standard, we can do that. So I'm happy to invite comments on that. Eric.
Clarifying question, is there any reason that we'd want to include those couple of bike sheds? Because it seems like that it's kind of a no-brainer to do the first bullet point, which is basically just let's rev the version number. Are we trying to open up the scope to a bunch more than that, or is it still?
No, so, in my view, these are fundamental questions about what happens when you roll a new version that we didn't really decisively resolve, in my view, in shipping 9000. Again, I mean, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. I just refer you to the questions. Just how do we number things, and what is the status of ALPN for new versions? We have to settle it one way or the other.
Thanks,
David.
And there we go. Thanks for the presentation, Martin. I think it's not a given that we want to ship a quick version 2 with minor changes, because like that'll break a lot of things. So for example, like sure, adding quick V2 support to my code base is trivial. Like, if we assume it's a version that just has different salts and whatever. But if I do that, then all of our tests will have to run with another version, and like the carbon impact of that is like more than going on in the world, which is just terrifying when I think about it. But more importantly, if we deploy this on our servers, it means that now we need to support these things for longer. We need more versions in alt service, and we can end up with like compatibility problems. Take, for example, we still have middle boxes out there that like to extract the SNI of quick packets. They will break. Some people will tell you that's a feature. Some people will tell me to roll back my change because they consider it a bug. So there is what I'm trying to say is there's a non-zero cost to deploying a quick version 2. And therefore, is it the right move to do a quick version 2 whose sole purpose is to be version 2? Or do we want to take up some more work and fix some things that we want to fix as part of that effort? But then we open ourselves to like second system syndrome. So just wanted to put that option out there. It's not free to do a version with few changes.
Thanks, David. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I would say that greasing, I mean, that's kind of the nature of greasing, right? Is that you're deliberately breaking middle boxes that are improperly, making improper assumptions about the packet format. But fair enough. Yes, absolutely. There's a risk of breakage if people adopt this.
Yeah, I mean, in this specific case, I don't think if the middle box is properly parsing quick view 1 packets and is making the assumption that it can only speak the version that was published to RFC when they wrote the code, they're not technically doing anything wrong. But yeah, thanks.
Becker?
Thanks for thinking this through. I guess I'm softly in favor of this. I think it'd be good to. I know I'm not as sort of in a shape with the middle box thing as others might be, but I think it has some value. I think greasing. I think that getting some experience with the machine read negotiation would be helpful since we're actually about to specify it. I would be against making any technical changes at all. Really, just on pragmatic grounds. We like opened up, we opened up 8446 for the purpose of, like removing the word master and making some technical, making some editorial changes, and I'm still screwing with it like 9 months later. And that was like really would be a position of not making any real changes at all. So I think we can just publish this tomorrow, more or less as it is. But if we but anything other than like trivial clarifications, I think just like once you open the patient, you just start to be like really hard to stop.
Right. So to be absolutely clear, I'm also not in favor of like putting any nice to haves in here. In terms of fixes, I was talking about like actual like discovered security vulnerabilities and that sort of thing, should they arise.
Yeah. And I think I just think we should put what I would do, and I sort of failed to do this with 8446 is like put a 2-month limit on like call for like things, and they have to be like really clear defects of some kind or another, and then we'll just like fix them and go. I mean things like where it's obvious the spec is just like the spec says something incoherent, or it contradicts itself, or like it's obviously wrong. But like I think the idea should be, I think that that like let me put it this way: it should absolutely be the case that like modulo these constants, your code in the wire should not change. And if code in the wires change, then we're probably like that's like bad news, right?
Yeah.
So that'd be my point.
Thank you, MT.
I need to preempt this. So I'm also sort of soft on this. I am maybe a little more supportive than Eka. Eka sort of soft support, because I don't see us shipping the version negotiation stuff without something like this. And so I think we should do this. Your discussion previously, though, made me think that you were doing like a biz document, but it doesn't seem to be like that in its current form, and I prefer its current form. I think what you've done is almost perfect for it. So I think this is something we should adopt and try to get it out at the same time as the version negotiation draft.
Thank you, Brian.
Hello. Yeah, so everything Martin said and everything Ecker said, I would add that I would actually go a little further than that and request that the chairs schedule a working group last call at adoption time. just to basically say there is an actual deadline to keep the temptation to stuff things into here down. I like agree a bit with David's point. We should consider the cost of doing this. I think that the right way to consider the cost of doing this is publish a document and experiment. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued. I'm very sympathetic to the sentiment to just like ship it immediately. I do think we have to work out this ALPN issue and just decide what we're going to do.
Will that take more than 2 or 3 months? I'm not saying schedule working group last call to start at adoption. I'm saying at adoption time, also go ahead and say working group last call will start at this time.
Yeah, should it? No, but you know we've done crazy things before. So will it is a different question.
Yeah,
Tommy.
Yeah, I'll echo Martin and Brian. I think this is good to adopt. I think it's good to do. And the reason I came into the queue, just to kind of answer to David's point about it being expensive. I don't think we need to see everyone do this. Like we just need enough greasing that the internet sees the new version going by, right? And there are places where we could do it. Like we have different stacks. Like we don't have like the stack that YouTube uses doesn't have to use this. Right now, we're using Quick for a ton of traffic with our private relay stuff on Apple devices. We could, like we don't care about SNI there. We don't care about any of this stuff. We can just like, yeah, if it breaks middle boxes, let's figure that out. Let's find it out. And there are places that could deploy this first that are safer than changing Google's main stack. So we can volunteer to do that.
Thank you. Give it back to the chairs. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the discussion. I think we'll go away based on that feedback, probably send an adoption call to the list. So encourage people to look out for that and provide further feedback there. That gives us some time for our as time permits bucket. We'd like to go with the first of those items, which is Ian, to talk about accuracy timestamps. Or is Connor presenting?
It's going to be Connor. Feel free to ask questions of me as well, but he's kind of the expert on this in a lot of ways.
Let me share the slides here.
Yep, you're up. Take it away.
Awesome. So my name's Connor. I formerly worked at Google developing congestion control algorithms for real-time interactive streaming applications, such as cloud gaming in the form of Google Stadia, and presenting this work in collaboration with Ian. And we're proposing a quick extension for reporting fine-grained packet receive timestamp information, meaning the receiver of the packets tells the sender when exactly each packet was received. And this is all with the overall goal to offer richer signals to congestion control algorithms built on top of Quick. For some brief context, receive timestamps were supported in the original gquick implementation, initially to serve WebRTC's GoogCC algorithm, which requires it. And so here we're wanting to kind of evolve and standardize that concept. And also for awareness, there's another timestamp related draft worth looking at, which has a kind of similar purpose, but achieves it by slightly different means and at a little bit different granularity. There's quite a bit of existing work on using received timestamps to improve the precision of a network measurement. The foundational intuition behind these methods is to measure when a packet ingresses and egresses the downstream network path modeled as a queue. And then by observing the variation in that one-way queue traversal delay, you can better estimate various properties of the underlying network state. And notably, this doesn't require clock synchronization between the client and server, because the queue traversal time variation is measured always kind of relative to other queue traversal times. Probably the most widely deployed application of this concept is in WebRTC congestion control, which observes differences between packet inter-departure and packet inter-arrival times at a frame level to estimate some state about the underlying queue and respond to congestion. And there's also research like path chirp and associated methods like packet pair and packet train, which similarly observe the send and receive timestamps for multiple temporally coherent packets to estimate that network queue state. And my team at Google also recently submitted a paper which we hope to get accepted and published and share with you all, detailing how we use receive timestamps for these kind of latency critical real-time media applications in production. So let me skip ahead. At a high level, we're suggesting a new ACK receive timestamp frame type to be sent in the same manner as a normal ACK frame in the place of a normal ACK frame. And it has all the fields of the normal ACK frame, but also includes additional fields to encode receive timestamp information in a efficient variant-based format, which we'd love feedback on. We've defined 2 transport parameters to negotiate the use of this frame. The first specifies the maximum number of receive timestamps the endpoint would like to have reported back to it. And so 0 here means I don't want to receive these packet receive timestamp reports. And the second parameter is the exponent precision to use when encoding the timestamp deltas, much like ACK delay exponent currently does, where you can achieve better bit efficiency at some precision cost. So that's the super short version, and maybe I'll hand it over to Ian then at this point to talk about next steps.
Christine, go for it.
Yeah, why don't we take questions? Go for it, Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that design, and it's kind of a logical design if you want to do fine-grained reporting, that you have to include that in an ACK format. Now, the reason the current extension doesn't do that, the current proposal doesn't do that, is because I got the feedback in the working group at the time that we wanted extension to be composable. That is, that we wanted the extension to be outside of the ACK format, for example, so that people that use the ACK format can go on using it. But if the extension is present, they can compose the extension with the ACK format. And that's one of the subtle differences that you mentioned. And whether it should be basically, let's change the ACK frame to have an ACK plus timestamp frame, or whether we should have a timestamp extension and parallel to the ACK extension, the ACK frame. That was really the big design question.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Christian. So we kind of talked about this a long time ago, but there are definite advantages to including it in the ACK frame, which is to say that the congestion controller gets to consume all of the acknowledgement information simultaneously, which kind of just makes it easier to write a congestion controller. But you're right that there may be use cases for which this is less suitable because it is not composable. And so it might depend on the use case. I don't know.
For example, an example of composition is using these as part of the pass challenges.
Yeah. I mean, you could also use this, I would think, to get the same information, but I guess
but
you
would have to yeah, it wouldn't be quite the same. It's not quite the same because I mean you're not supposed to you aren't supposed to acknowledge the past challenges, etc. I mean it's
right. You'll have to think about that. Right. Thanks. Vijay, why don't you go, because we have 1 minute left.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about just a clarification question. So if there's an ACK timestamp frame, is it going to follow the same frequency as the ACK frequency frame, or probably less than that? And when there's, compressed ACKs, when you are ACKing maybe once per RTT, that probably won't work for real-time transport. So Yeah, just something to consider, I guess. Because
Yeah,
it's
so
not
when
like right.
yeah, so clearly the real-time congestion controller would have to decide what frequency of acknowledgement it needed if you used ACK frequency. And so I assume that it would want to use a value that's more canonically typical, like a quarter of an RTT, half an RTT or less. But yes, and I don't know. I guess I feel like this is a tool that a congestion controller can use to get more information, but it's without each congestion controller probably needs to decide like exactly how much information it really needs and when. So it's a really valid point.
Okay. And is the timestamp the only thing that is useful for the real-time congestion controller, or are there some other RTCP?
What packet loss and other signals are used, but I think they're not used for bandwidth estimation per se. Connor might have more information, but I think probably that's this was sent out to the list. Would you mind posting there since we have 0 minutes left?
Okay, I'll
and
do
I
that.
think
Thank
maybe
you.
Connor can give you a longer answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Jonna, you have 0 minutes.
Thanks. So 2 quick points. First, I would strongly argue for composing, the reason being that the number of times that you want to repeat this information is different for an acknowledgement versus for a timestamp. So a timestamp is advisory typically, and you just need to send it once. Even if the peer does not receive it, it's fine. But with an acknowledgement information, you may want to keep repeating the information. So there's a lot of repetition that happens there, which you can avoid entirely when you're doing timestamps. So having a separate frame that conveys that information would allow you to do that, whereas it would be tricky if you're trying to put that into the ACK frame itself. Second, the reason that ACK ranges exist in the ACK frame is because we can express a list of ACKs as a range. It doesn't make sense to me to express a timestamp range. I'm not quite sure what that means and what that really is. So I would have expected to see a timestamp per packet that is being acknowledged, because that is really what the wants to receive.
Yeah, that's what the format actually does. It's just that the range is used because typically packets are received in order, and there are not a huge number of gaps, and the range allows you to express ranges of timestamps more efficiently.
So what is the range? What is the range of timestamp though? That's what I'm asking. What does a timestamp range look like?
And this is going into the details, but basically it's like you get timestamps for the next 7 packets, and instead of
folks, we're like
we should go. We should get out of this. But yes, yep, we'll do.
It's a framing thing, not a. We should probably have
fundamental
destructed what the data is and what the framing is separately. That's fair.
Yeah. So thanks for your time. We need to wrap this up now. Let's keep it short and sweet. I'd like to thank everyone for this meeting and behaving well. Thank you to our scribe and Watson, and our note takers, Jonathan and Robin. Nico, apologies we couldn't get to yours. Time permits. We'll follow that up on that off list. We have some chair actions we need to take. We'll speak to the ADs and various people in back channel. So keep your eyes on the mailing list. That's all I have. I don't know if you want to add anything, Matt. Okay. Until next time, same time, different place, or maybe different time. Goodbye.